This is Cory Doctorow from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 440 for August 4th, 2025. As you hear this, I am on my way to Las Vegas, Nevada, heading to what we lovingly call Hacker Summer Camp. And that is 3 cybersecurity conferences, world-renowned cybersecurity conferences, back to back to back, starting off with B-Sides Las Vegas, then Black Hat, which I never go to, and wrapping up with DEF CON. This is always an absolutely crazy week, and it's usually crazy in a good way. You pretty much are busy from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, and the time you go to bed is often very late. But it's a great chance to meet people and to learn some new stuff, so I'm always psyched about going. I always try to have something fun and new and interesting to do every time I go back. I've done indie badges in the past. I've actually given a talk at one of the villages before. I've interviewed the founder of DEF CON and Black Hat, Jeff Moss, aka Dark Tangent. I've interviewed him a couple times. It's been a while. I'll have to see if I can't make another one of those interviews happen. But this year I'm going to be doing a book signing. The vendor area at DEF CON has always got some really great stuff, including hacker boxes, which is one of my favorite tinkering hobbies. But this year I'll be doing a book signing. I have ordered and paid for 40 copies of my own book, had them shipped to my hotel. They have arrived, they assure me. And at noon, local time on Friday at DEF CON in the vendor area, table 2, I will be signing copies of my book. I will be charging $40 flat in cash only because that's kind of how things roll at DEF CON. And it frankly just makes it a lot easier for me. So if by chance you will be there, swing on by Friday at noon and say hi and maybe grab a copy of the book. And speaking of the book, my book has once again been included in a Humble bundle. I don't know if I've ever heard of these before, but they're really pretty cool. They bundle software and games and books into really high-value compilations for not a whole lot of money, like usually around $20. And for that $20, you get, anywhere from like 15 to 25 books, PDF versions of those books, but still. And so actually, unbeknownst to me, my publisher, Apress/Springer, added my book to one of their cybersecurity Humble bundles again. This is the second time that I've been in one. The first time I knew it was coming. This time somebody actually told me, hey, did you know you're in a Humble bundle again? I'm like, no. But I am. So anyway, there's a link to that in the show notes if you're curious. It's a great way to get a copy of my book and a whole bunch of other cybersecurity books for not a whole lot of money. And this particular bundle also includes How to Catch a Fish by Nick Oles, who has been on the show before. We talked about fishing. So it's a great way to get a whole bunch of cybersecurity books for not a lot of money. Check it out. Okay, so we have another interview show for you today. As promised, we'll be talking again with Cory Doctorow, an author, an activist, and a longtime EFF member/supporter. And this will make my 6th interview with Cory, which makes him the most interviewed guest I've ever had, which follows Bruce Schneier and John Graham Cumming, who's the CTO of Cloudflare. And Cory is always a very interesting person to talk to, and this interview is no different. We're going to talk, of course, about Enshittification. So heads up, you'll be hearing that word a lot, and there will be some swearing in here, just FYI. And we'll be talking about things like copyright and DRM, which are topics that Cory is very passionate about and has been for many years. But Cory put out a blog recently. He's extremely prolific. I don't know where this guy finds time to write as much as he writes. But in one of his recent blog posts, he talked about an interesting response to the Trump tariffs. And I said, let's talk about that. Let's have him bring you back on the show and let's explore that idea a little bit. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So before we dive in, I got a little bit of a jargon I want to define for you real quick. Things we talk about that we don't really define as we go. And at one point, Cory uses the phrase a Turing complete universal von Neumann machine. So there's a lot to unpack there. But Turing complete is named for Alan Turing, who of course is a famous mathematician/computer scientist, the one featured in the movie The Imitation Game about breaking the Enigma codes. Anyway, so when a computer is Turing complete, it means that it could basically has enough different basic commands in it that it could be used to pretty much calculate anything, could do any sort of algorithm. And von Neumann was actually based off another famous person named John von Neumann back in the, I think, mid-1940s, another computer scientist who came up with the basic model of all modern computers, having a central processing unit, some storage area, some memory area to store commands that you're going to run, inputs and outputs. That whole kind of general diagram of a computer we still use today. So Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines, it's just a fancy term for what we think of today as a computer. We also talk a little bit about IP law. In this case, we're talking about intellectual property, not the Internet Protocol. And at one point, Corey talks about doing a regex, sometimes pronounced regex, that's R-E-G-E-X, which is short for regular expressions. And it's sort of a language or a syntax unto its own that is used to do search and replace in text files. It happens to be very good at pattern matching. And this is something that I have used many, many times in my career. And it is confusing if you don't use it on a regular basis. And we talk about that today in the context of artificial intelligence. And one other thing I'll mention that we talk about that I don't really explain is there was a recent lawsuit against AI company Anthropic, and they basically ingested lots of copyrighted works in order to train their AI models. And there was a lawsuit that was filed against them alleging copyright infringement that had an interesting outcome that I asked his opinion on. So I think that'll about do it. So without further ado, let's get to my very interesting interview with a very interesting man, Cory Doctorow. Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author, an activist, a journalist, and a blogger at the site Pluralistic. He's written a whole bunch of great books, both fiction and non, including Little Brother, one of my all-time favorites, Choke Point Capitalism, and most recently, Picks and Shovels. Welcome back to the show, Cory.
Yeah, nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me back on.
Before we get into some of the issues, I'm just curious. You coined a term about that time that we talked about then, Enshittification, about the decaying of internet platforms. And I think shortly after we talked, it was declared the word of the year by the American Dialect Society and has since been added to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And frankly, it's been used everywhere. I've seen it all over, even mainstream media, which is fantastic. So before we actually talk about some of the issues, I'm really curious to know, has there been much impact from just coining the term? Like, has it led to a broader understanding of the issue by either the general populace or maybe by lawmakers? Because oftentimes, sometimes just naming something or creating like a useful taxonomy can really further a cause. So I'm just curious what effect like the terminology has had.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much nailed it there, that when you give people a word for something that they experience but don't know how to describe, you help them see it as a pattern.
Yeah.
And they start to understand that their torment isn't just some local phenomenon or a single bad decision made by one bad manager or product designer, but rather a kind of pattern that is economy-wide and cross-sectoral. People are using enshittification loosely, which I encourage listeners to do. It's fine not to use it to describe the specific technical platform decay that my critique concerns itself with. That kind of semantic drift is how you know a word has entered the lexicon and become part of a wider phenomenon. I mean, when we say that, someone has run out of gas, it's not a slight on cars, and it doesn't weaken
Right.
our ability to discuss the automotive industry. Enshittification can be both colloquial and specific and technical. And the alternative would be to confine its use to a group of irrelevant insiders, because those are the only people who are going to hew to some tight technical meaning. And, like policymakers are using it. So the Irish tech regulator, who, given that so many tech companies pretend that they're headquartered in Ireland for tax purposes, is one of the most powerful tech regulators in the world, used it in an official speech. And so, yeah, this is, I think, taking root. And, I've turned in all the edits on the Enshittification book that's out in October. There's an Enshittification graphic novel that'll be out the following year. There's a documentary film crew that's raised money to make an Enshittification doc.
Oh, wow.
And now we're talking about a young reader's edition, because I think part of the magic of Enshittification is that people like to swear. And
Yes.
if you give them both something that is very expressive of something that matters to them and that's giving them a lot of pain in their lives, and you let them swear and blow off some steam, it's a really important combination. I actually had a colleague say, I wish you didn't have a swear word in it. I can't talk to NATO generals about enshittification. I'm like, well, first of all, I think by definition, generals have heard the word shit.
Right.
But also, have at it, bro. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've come up with lots of jargony ways to talk about this. It was the swearing that made it take wing. So, if you can make it go viral without swearing, I'm happy to have you do it. And there are lots of NPR radio editors who will be very glad because they can have you on instead of me, and they don't have to beep it out to avoid getting in trouble with the FCC. And I'll use the word too sometimes. That'll be fine. So I think giving a lot of people a license to swear about something that makes them really angry is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for giving us that word, because it's I've used it quite a bit myself, and I try not to swear too much on this, not gratuitously anyway. And so, it gives me kind of license to say it too. You're right. That has its own value. All right. So, let's revisit a little bit of things we've talked about before, but just to catch people up. The big tech companies, let's face it, have captured users, content creators, advertisers, even regulators, our social media feeds, search results, app stores. Just about every popular service now is showing us what they want us to see instead of what we ask to see. And they're also increasingly charging us for ongoing fees for the features we used to get for free, or maybe now we just have to watch more ads to see them. Okay, so how do we get here? Who broke the internet?
Yeah, that's the title of a podcast I did with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation about enshittification. The collapse of the internet is really about the collapse of disciplining forces on tech bosses. So it used to be that when you did something bad with your tech service, that something bad would happen to you, and maybe you'd go extinct, or maybe you'd learn your lesson. But one way or another, there were some consequences. So, for example, at one point we had competitors on the internet.
What?
Right? It wasn't what Tom Eastman calls 5 giant websites filled with screenshots of text from the other 4. But if you follow the antitrust case against Meta, you'll know that these companies bought their competitors specifically because they wanted to extinguish competition. It's funny because antitrust law, it's been in a doldrums since the Reagan years. Really, Carter kicked it off. And one of the reasons that it's hard to enforce isn't just that there's this edifice of bad case law that's been built up by these judges with these fringe theories about how monopolies aren't that bad and competition law doesn't really intend to preserve competition. But part of it is that to make certain kinds of antitrust cases stick, you have to demonstrate the intent to reduce competition, to create a monopoly. It's not really illegal, or at least not under some parts of the antitrust laws. It's not illegal to merely have a monopoly. It's illegal to try and create a monopoly.
Or maintain one, and I assume.
Or maintain one, that's right. So unless you can sort of peer into the minds of a CEO, it's very hard to make that case. But if you are Mark Zuckerberg and you are addicted to putting every incriminating thought that goes through your mind in an email to another executive, it can be pretty easy. So Mark Zuckerberg sent an email to his CFO in the middle of the night. Mark Zuckerberg's famously a night owl. If you read Careless People, the really good whistleblower memoir by Sarah Wynne Williams, who ran international policy for Facebook, you'll know that at one point, Mark Zuckerberg nearly scuttled peace negotiations in the 50-year civil war in Colombia because he wouldn't get up before noon to be on stage with the president of Colombia. And so it's like 2 a.m, Zuckerberg sends an email to his CFO, and it's like, hey, Bob, you're asking me why I want to buy Instagram for $1 billion, even though it only has 12 employees. Well, the reality is that people like Instagram better than they like Facebook. And they leave Facebook and they go to Instagram and they don't come back. And so if we buy this company, well, then it doesn't matter if they leave Facebook because they'll still be Facebook users. They'll be users of the company, not the platform. Now, this is it's a confession, right? It's like, hey, Bob, I know we're planning to kill that guy tomorrow. And just for avoidance of doubt, I just want to make sure that I consider it to be a murder and that I am premeditating it.
Right.
And Obama's DOJ waved it through. And if you can't get a merger blocked on that basis, any merger is fair game. And that's how you get these companies that are just like so inbred they have Habsburg jaws, where they've just gobbled up every single competitor. Google, a company that's made one successful product in-house, a search engine, in the previous millennium. And everything they've done this millennium, almost without exception, is a failure, except for the things they bought from other people. Right. Which they operationalized. And, don't get me wrong, I'm an ex-ops guy. Ops is good. Ops is really important. Without ops, everything stops working. But it's not inventing products. It's not innovation. It's maintenance. Maintenance is good, but it's, we're supposed to have an innovation economy. So we lose competition. Companies don't worry about losing your business anymore. They're like Lily Tomlin in the AT&T ads on SNL, right? We don't care. We don't have to. We're the phone company.
Right.
And then when you lose competition, you lose regulation. So like competition is the discipline imposed by markets and regulation is the discipline imposed by states. And the thing is, for regulation to work, the regulators have to be more powerful than the companies they regulate, right? The referee has to be more powerful than the teams on the field.
Right.
And when a sector is just like 5 companies, they can all kind of Voltron together and gang up on their regulator because they don't have a collective action problem. It's really easy for them to agree on what their policies are. It's why we haven't had a new privacy law in America. No new consumer privacy law at the federal level since Reagan banned video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you have in 1988 with the Video Privacy Protection Act. It's the last technological privacy threat Congress has bestirred itself to deal with under Democrats, under Republicans, when you had all 3 branches of government controlled by one party or the other. Nothing. Crickets. As we went through Snowden and as we went through the giant breaches of the data brokerages and the credit bureaus, and as we went through scandals where foreign adversaries raided American businesses and stole their data. I mean, just one after another, phishing epidemics and impersonation epidemics and trade secret thefts, and just Congress can't do anything about this, and it's because there's so much money in systematically violating your human rights at scale. And the companies that do it are, 5 giant firms that they can just all agree that when privacy law comes up, they all show up in Congress. They all say the same thing, that this will destroy American business. And that's it. That's the end of it. We actually got a ban on data brokerages under Biden through the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, but Trump killed it.
Yep.
So, there you go. And so you get regulatory captures, no discipline from that. It used to be that tech workers could do something about their boss's worst impulses. Tech workers were in huge demand. They could walk across the street and get a job somewhere else. They often really cared about their work, partly because the journey to be a tech worker, especially before the salaries went crazy, was the journey of just falling in love with technology and how it made your life better. And you wanted everyone else to have that, right? We all know that person, right? The person who just really wants you to use Mastodon or Linux or, whatever, right? Someone whose life has been changed for the better by technology, they become evangelists for it. They're like Jehovah's Witnesses for free software, right? Yeah. And so, these people, because they could get a job across the street, the same day, and because their bosses couldn't hire their replacements because there was a huge shortage of tech workers, they held the line. But if the only power you have comes from scarcity, when the scarcity goes away, so does the power. And we lost the scarcity. We've had 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 3 years. Facebook just announced a 5% across-the-board headcount reduction and doubled their executive bonuses. Wow. Right? This is not a company that is afraid of its tech workforce. And so tech workers couldn't hold the line anymore. And then finally, there was interoperability. Right? The fact that Turing-complete universal von Neumann machines have lurking within them an 11-foot ladder for every 10-foot wall that tech wants to build. You put some code in a printer that checks to see it's not generic ink. I write some code that disables that code. Yeah. You put some code in my phone to make sure I'm using Apple's App Store. I write some code that goes around that code, right? But IP law has been monotonically expanded over 25 years to make all of that stuff a felony. Jay Freeman calls it felony contempt of business model. Yeah. So that modifying technology that you own to do something legal is illegal because you violate terms of service or you break DRM or there's a patent or there's copyright or there's trademark or there's a trade secret or some other component there which stands in the way, not technically of doing this, but legally of doing it. And so while you or I might be able to sit down and do the reverse engineering work and maybe share it with our friends, normies are never going to get an ad for click here to block all the ads in your apps and turn off all tracking on your phone. And here's an 800 number you can call if it stops working. And if they do get that ad, it'll be fraud.
Well, and then now we have AI, right? The other thing is putting pressure on tech jobs, rightly or wrongly, because as a software engineer, I think it's a great tool. I think it could make me as a software engineer more productive, but it doesn't replace me. And yet I think there's a lot of bean counters and people getting those kind of bonuses that are saying we could replace 30% of our workforce with AI.
Well, I think the reason they're saying that is because they want to discipline their workers.
Sure.
In the same way that you had studio bosses who, understand that the difference between giving notes to a writer's room and prompting an AI is not the stupid shit that comes out of your mouth, right? You're still going to say to both of them, make me E.T., but put a car chase in the second act, and maybe it's about a dog and give it a love interest. But the difference is that when you say it to the AI says, yes, sir, and barfs it up. Whereas when you say it to the writer's room, all work stops while they crawl around on the floor looking for the eyeballs that fell out of their heads when they were rolling their eyes at you, right? And the same way, tech bosses fantasize furiously about a tech workforce that takes whatever bullshit they say and just salutes and runs it up the flagpole. And so they really want this to be true. It makes them marks for AI companies, right? Who are peddling AI. It's because they're selling them, they're pushing on an open door, right? They're selling them the thing they fantasize about. It's like selling an alchemist, a mercury milkshake, right? Like those guys want to drink the mercury. You're just helping them do it. And, you're helping them kill themselves, which is what we're helping these tech companies to do. To understand the relationship of AI and coders and why you meet coders who are like, I use AI and it's great and it's made my life so much better. And you meet other coders who are like, I use AI and I'm afraid to get in an airplane now because maybe they're using AI to write the code for it. Is you have to understand something from automation theory called centaurs and reverse centaurs. So a centaur, it's like a human head on a machine body. It's someone who's being assisted by a machine. So if you're a coder, and you're like, I can't remember the syntax for that command. Rather than Googling it, I'm going to ask the AI what it is. And if it's wrong, I'm going to know right away, right? I'm going to say, oh, I need a regex that does something, just to as a one-off to not code you're going to run, but to pull something out of a big file once that you want to do. And you can just tell whether it's pulled it out or not. Like you can see whether the regex works or not. And you know that there aren't any weird corner cases because you're just using it once. You've got your test data right there. Those people who are like, oh, I use the thing to stop me from having to tinker with a regex for 45 minutes in the middle of a project that was much more important than reminding myself where the curly brace goes. That person is a centaur. But the reverse centaur is someone who their boss says, right, we've fired 9 of the 10 people in your department. The programming is now all going to be done by the chatbot. Your job is to review a superhuman amount of code. And if it makes anyone sick or kills someone or steals from someone, we're going to blame you, right? That person's a reverse centaur. And actually, there's some other terms for this. There's moral crumple zone and accountability sink. Right, you are the accountability sink for the code.
Those are dark
and
terms.
Here's an example from non-coding that I think makes it really clear. You might remember a couple of weeks ago, the Chicago Sun-Times folded in Hearst magazine supplement that was a summer guide, right? And it had 30 summer lists of things to do, beaches to go to, and food to try and stuff. And the summer reading guide had 15 books on it, and 10 of them were AI hallucinations. And Jason Kebler at 404 Media tracked the guy whose byline was on it and the guy said, yeah, you got me. I used AI. I use it for work. I feel really dumb about this. Normally I'm a lot more careful. I screwed up that day and it's really embarrassing. And that was the first article Jason wrote about. And a lot of people kind of dunked on this guy, and, rightly so. But then Jason did a follow-up, and the follow-up was about his experience at the Washington Monthly when he was an intern at the start of his career. And where they would do these summer guides, and the way that it would work is 3 interns would write each of these listicles, overseen by a real journalist with a fact checker on the back end. And he went and he looked at the summer guide that Hearst had published. It had 30 listicles with one byline on all of them, right? So this guy works in a newsroom where they fired 25 people and he's the last man standing, and they're like, go write 30 guides. Also, we're not going to tell you not to use AI, but also if the AI hallucinates and you don't catch it, guess who everyone's going to blame?
Right.
Right. So that's, I think, the way to understand AI and its relationship to labor. That and the fact that you have a lot of workers who are very precarious, which I think is something that programmers should be paying attention to, because hackers, when there's enough hackers to go around, are going to be as precarious as taxi drivers or indeed nurses. And nurses increasingly in this country are hired by hospitals on a contract basis through one of 3 apps that call themselves, Uber for nursing, and that have replaced the dozens and dozens of local contracting services that used to work regionally and locally to give nurses shifts. And the way that these apps work is before the nurse is offered a shift, it looks up their credit history.
Oh, geez.
And if they're sitting on a ton of delinquent credit card debt, they get offered a lower wage.
Oh, my.
Because they're willing to work for less money. Now, that's it's not, probably there's some LLM gunk in there, but it's algorithmic, right?
Sure.
This is the algorithmic labor threat. It's not algorithmic unemployment where you were made obsolete. It's that like a job that doesn't exist because it can't exist, which is adjusting every worker's wage according to their credit history, because no one could do that because it requires a superhuman amount of speed and tedious labor. That is being automated algorithmically, and it's being used to take money away from workers and give it to their bosses. That is a technological employment and labor threat, and it's real. And it's not hypothetical, and it's not in the future, and it's not the Perplexity AI guy saying in 10 years, 30% of all jobs are going to be replaced by AI, which is a thing that he's backed up with the extensive data of nothing. He got it from the important think tank, his ass. Right.
Right. Rectal extraction method is what I like to call that.
That's right. Yeah. So, this is a real thing. Like, it's a real material thing in the world right now. And I think it's as salacious and titillating as any fantasy about AI stealing your job in the future. And I think we should be paying at least as much attention as we do to all that nonsense.
Well, the other aspect that we need to fold in here is this notion of DRM, because over the years we don't own anything anymore. We just license it, right? I mean, I don't think a lot of people kind of grok that. Like, we still quote unquote buy music and TV shows and books and games and software through a quote unquote store, but it's all an online store, and we could actually lose access, or that could be disabled at any time for any number of reasons. And it's happened, and even to the point where hardware gets bricked because companies decide they don't want to produce the software that supports it anymore. And in some cases, like, what was it, the Spotify thing was bricked because the company didn't want to do it anymore. So DRM is required to administer all this stuff, so we have privacy implications that as well we didn't used to have. As you mentioned, we had laws in place that prevented people from knowing what books you checked out at the library or what videos you rented at the rental store. But now, because everything is laced with DRM, everything we do has to be checked before we do it, which means they have to know who's doing it when it's done. So at one point, like, again, we had these laws like, oh, we absolutely can't tell you what books we checked out. That's bad. Now we know everything everybody does all the time. Where did we lose sight of those values?
Well, it's not that we lost sight of those values. It's that we let firms become so concentrated that they're able to capture their regulators, right? And, the DRM law didn't come from tech companies. It actually came from entertainment companies. The story of it is that in the early 90s, Bill Clinton wanted to demilitarize and offer private sector access to the internet. And so he asked Al Gore to have what we call the information superhighway hearings, the National Information Infrastructure hearings. And another Gore official, or rather another Clinton official, a guy called Bruce Lehman, who was his IP czar, who was a guy who'd been a lawyer for all the big entertainment companies and was now in government. He went to Gore with a proposal for a law that would make it illegal to bypass DRM, even to do something legal. And Gore, to his credit, said, that's a terrible idea and we're not doing it. Go away. And he did go away. In his own words, he, quote, did an end run around Congress. And he went to the United Nations, to the World Intellectual Property Organization. He got them to make this an obligation in treaties. And then he got America to ratify the treaty. And then Congress passed the DMCA. in order to ratify the treaty, right? And so that's how we got this law. And countries all around the world got DRM laws just like the American DMCA because the U.S. Trade Representative said, we will put tariffs on your exports unless you sign this law. And no one wanted that. Now, it's interesting to ask, like, maybe countries should get rid of that law now that they all have tariffs on their exports. Not least because it would let them break the DRM on American products. And first, they could export those tools, right? So, like, mechanics around the world right now pay $10,000 per manufacturer per year for the diagnostic tools to decode the error messages that turn on your check engine light. And you could imagine an adversarial interoperable tool where you just have a bunch of hackers who go through the CAN buses of cars and decode those errors and put them in a third-party tool. And every time there's a new firmware pushed or every time a new car comes off the line, they do it again and they offer real-time support and an 800 number you can call. And every mechanic in the world gives them $25 a month. And, you multiply 25 times 12 months in a year times all the mechanics in the world. And suddenly the country that has that business in it has the relationship to auto repair that Finland had to mobile phones for 15 years when Nokia ruled the world, right? So it's a huge opportunity to, consume the monopoly surplus that has been acquired by American firms enjoying the benefits of this dreadful law and use it as like the fuel for a single-use rocket booster that gets your own tech sector into a stable orbit. Right. And so not only do you get that, but then everyone in the world, including Americans, because American mechanics are going to buy this, even if it's illegal to get it. 'Cause if you got a credit card and you've got an internet connection, you can buy this from Canada or Ghana or wherever it's being made. Everybody gets the consumer surplus. Everyone gets to go to a mechanic who is saving $50,000 a year or $70,000 a year on diagnostic tools and who shares that surplus with you in the form of cheaper repairs and more competition, which can drive the cost of repairs down. And you multiply that by every single racket, right? Like someone is going to be the Nokia of the thing that unlocks your printer so it works with third-party ink. And probably the customers for that aren't going to be people who own printers. It's going to be people who make third-party ink who are going to bundle it with generic ink cartridges. And that's a huge market, sort of ripe for, I know it's a bad word these days, but ripe for disruption, right? Because printer ink, thanks to DRM that makes it illegal to disable the generic ink checking code, printer ink's the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian today without a special permit. You pay $10,000 a gallon for the colored water that you use to print, your grocery list. It's more than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. And, somebody should be disrupting the hell out of that market and making a lot of money. If you remember when Amazon kicked off, Jeff Bezos gave this speech about the publishers where he said, your margin is my opportunity.
Yeah.
That margin is an opportunity for someone, for a lot of people, for a million bodega owners and dry cleaning shop owners who will have a guy with a folding card table at the back who will jailbreak your printer for you and sell you the ink for it. But also for one or two lucky countries that back out of these DRM laws and, create a domestic tech sector that, remember is going to spin out a lot of other companies, right? Like, once you had Fairchild Semiconductor in Silicon Valley, you got Intel. And once you got Intel, you got Atari and you got Apple and you got, all these other things. It just takes one big success and you get a cluster. If you ever go to Waterloo, Ontario, you'll see that Research in Motion, which is long dead, spawned a stable cluster of tech businesses, including things like Shopify, that all spun out of people who got their start there and who were capitalized by early employees who cashed out their options and were sitting on a fat bunch of money and were looking for startups and so on, right? That's the opportunity that's there, right? We can finally do this thing that they've been trying to do forever with governments all over the world, which is try and replicate Silicon Valley. The way you replicate Silicon Valley is by eating its goddamn lunch, right? Not by like I used to live in London and we had a little alleyway nearby called Silicon Roundabout. And so the alley was called what was it called? The alley was called Silicon Way. And the Old Street Roundabout was called Silicon Roundabout. Did not produce a tech sector that was domestic to London, but if the UK rescinded its implementation of Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, an EU law it no longer has to follow because of Brexit, then the UK could just be jailbreaking everything from like Mercedes engines to Epson printers to, iPhone app stores. And you could have a British company that made an app store tool that would allow anyone to create an app store. And you could also have a British app store that would take 3% instead of 30%, that could hire a bunch of fast-talking business people to go out and hit the 15% of sellers that are 80% of the business in Apple's app store and say, how'd you like to save 27% on every sale? Come and be on our platform instead.
This has been around for a long time. We've been bemoaning this for years, and this could have been a solution we could have brought up 10 years ago. But the reason it's coming up now, and you recently had an article about this, is the tariff madness that has been going on since the new administration. I mean, on a daily basis, these tariffs and tariff threats have changed constantly. So just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, these tariffs are obviously highly volatile, but once you go to this jailbreaking mode where you say, you know what, if you want to really retaliate against this, instead of doing counter tariffs, do this thing you're talking about where, you could really hit them where it hurts. Because so many of the trade deals we've had up to this point, up until these crazy, tariff madness we're in now, IP law has been baked into a lot of these things, NAFTA and all these other things. The U.S. has been really big about strong-arming these IP laws. But if we do this, if we jailbreak these things, jailbreaking is kind of forever, whereas tariffs could be dropped. If we jailbreak everything, what's to say, well, we'll just leave these tariffs in place. If you're really going to screw us, then we're just going to keep screwing you.
Well, look, I think that the era in which you can count on America to never have tariffs is over. I don't think that there's like if you remember when Trump did China tariffs during the first administration, when Biden came in, he kept them, right? This is a thing Trump repeats very often. And that
right.
I think a lot of people who didn't follow this think maybe he's like making it up or something. No, it's totally true.
Well, to be clear, tariffs have their place, right? I mean, any
good reasons to have
will tell
them.
you that it's a tool in the toolbox. It's just not the way we're doing them.
But this was a very, very brittle environment. And, it has now shattered. It's going to be very hard to put back together. I mean, creating this situation was really, really tough. It took decades of hard work, the WTO and the TRIPS and, all the subsequent treaties and so on. It's like once the Humpty Dumpty is broken, putting it back together again is going to be very hard. The circumstances under which we got global free trade were like post-Soviet collapse, a kind of American dominance and an expansive American internationalism, 50 years of America doing like Marshall Plan stuff and lots of countries being in America's orbit and so on. Like that's not going to be the circumstance when Trump goes away, right? It's like they're not going to be able to rebuild that, right? Like if Trump, choked on a cheeseburger tomorrow, it wouldn't be normal again. I think that's the lesson we failed to learn after 2016 is that, Trump is making irrevocable changes to the global order. And it's betting on everything being the Clinton years again is a much weirder bet than betting on let's get going while the getting's good. Not least because if you're the country that sits on the side while this is going on, and your neighbor's country is the one that launches this, it's a sector, well then, yeah, you're going to get the consumer surplus, right? You're going to get cheaper car repairs or cheaper ink or cheaper apps. But your neighbor's country is going to be the one that is incubating a lasting tech sector that might last for 5 generations, right? And produce wealth and bring in the best and the brightest from around the world, many of whom have given up on being in America, to come and work for them. So, what a crazy bet to make. I think for now you have an equilibrium that's holding, right, where people are hewing to their old reflexes. I actually have been pitching this a lot in Canada because, like all the best Americans, I'm a Canadian, and in Canada there's this think tank that's collecting responses to the Trump tariffs, and Canada's response has been to do retaliatory tariffs, which, given that Canada since the Mulroney years has been rolling itself out as a kind of branch plant for America, where we export raw materials and import finished goods. So retaliatory tariffs just mean that everything that we buy cost 25% more, which is a very weird way to punish America. It's like
Right.
punching yourself in the face really hard and hoping the downstairs neighbor says ouch, right? But I pitched this to them and they were like, yeah, that would work really well. Trump would be really angry. We can't do that because what if he punishes us? And I'm like,
well.
so we're only entertaining solutions to the tariffs that don't work because good ones will make Trump mad. Okay, you do you, baby. I'm gonna go off and push for this one because I call me crazy, but I think we should do stuff that works.
So I'm with you on a lot of copyright reform and certainly DRM reform, and yet, and we've perverted this over the years, but the original point, and I'm not an economist, but my understanding, the original point of copyrights and things like patents were to kind of grant a limited term monopoly to the creator, to incentivize them to create works and to have at least a limited window by which they could make profits off of that before somebody else could just copy it. And DRM, I don't know, this is maybe shoehorning it, but is there not some argument if DRM was done right? I don't know if that's a sentence that even makes sense. But should we somehow preserve the notion of we want to protect the creative works of these companies or innovations for a limited time before we do that?
Yeah, I don't think you need a DRM law to make this work. To keep that intact. So I mentioned that Bruce Lehman went off to WIPO to get his law passed. WIPO actually turned down the law that he pitched to Al Gore, which is a law that we're going to get into some like technical copyright stuff here, but a law that protects access controls without even if the circumvention has no nexus with copyright infringement. So what DRM law protects, what the DMCA and the WIPO treaties protect, is any effective means of access control to a copyrighted work. They don't define what effective means is. It's funny. There was one case about this that I know of. I don't think it's ever really been tested in court except for this one time. But if you remember the Napster wars, there was this weird Napster clone by this eccentric weirdo called Johnny Deep, and the Napster clone was called Aimster.
Oh yeah,
and
I remember that. Yeah.
The record industry was enumerating all the files in the network and sending takedown notices for them. So he put them in Pig Latin. And when they were decoding the Pig Latin, he said, "You've bypassed my access control." And the court said, "That's an access control, but it's not effective." Right? So we know that an access control needs to be stronger than Pig Latin. We don't know how much stronger before it acquires legal protection. But what Lehman wanted was a law that said if you bypass an access control, and you do so to access a copyrighted work, including the code of the DRM itself, which is software and therefore a copyrighted work, then you commit an offense under the DMCA, even if you don't violate anyone's copyright. So even if you don't pirate anything, even if you don't do anything illegal. And so this is how you get stuff like it's illegal to jailbreak a printer so you can use third-party ink, because like using third-party ink is not a copyright violation.
Right.
And turning off the DRM code in your printer doesn't violate the copyright of the person who wrote that DRM code. But because bypassing the access control is itself illegal, right, then it becomes an offense to jailbreak your printer. So like if I write an iPhone app and I give it to you to sideload onto your phone, I am the copyright holder to that iPhone app. You are the property owner of the phone. It doesn't violate anyone's copyright, including Apple's, for you to run my code on your phone with my permission and for me to sell it to you without letting Apple take 30 cents out of every dollar you give me, right? That's not a copyright violation. But bypassing the bootloader that stops you from sideloading, that is a DMCA violation because the bootloader itself has this penumbra of protection. Now, the WIPO law does not actually go that far. The WIPO law says that member states are obliged to protect access controls in connection with a copyright infringement. So in other words, if you jailbreak your phone and then infringe on someone's copyright, they could stick another offense on the charge sheet. But jailbreaking your phone under the WIPO treaty is perfectly legal. But the U.S. Trade Representative has made it his business to ensure that everyone who passes a law like this, starting with Congress with the DMCA, does more than the treaty requires. So we could have, I mean, I don't favor it, but we could have protection for access controls that was tied to an act of copyright infringement that would keep intact everything you're concerned with, right? You know, limited times, protecting their investment, blah, 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 but would not create this surreal thing where, you can't like install third-party ink on your printer, and someone who makes a copyrighted work can't sell it to you without Apple's permission.
Right. Well, something just came up recently. I don't know if you, I'm sure you probably did the Anthropic ruling about book scanning.
Mm-hmm.
That was an interesting kind of pro and con outcome, some good, some bad. What is your overall take on how that was decided?
So I was not surprised. I think that people have bad intuition about copyright, and partly because of the copyright wars that created a lot of weird ideas about it. Mm-hmm. So scraping itself is pretty unambiguously lawful just as an activity, right? Making a transient copy of a work is lawful. It's not a copyright infringement. Otherwise, we need licenses for your browser's buffer.
Right.
Right? I mean, and certainly you'd never get another search engine again if it was illegal to scrape. Mathematically analyzing a work also does not require the rights holder's permission, and that is true whether or not you acquired the work lawfully or unlawfully. Right? So if you go to a flea market and get a pirate CD and then count the number of beats per minute in a song, it's not a copyright infringement to count the number of beats per minute in the song, even if the song came off a pirate CD. Again, like, this is not surprising to anyone who understands copyright law. This is well understood. And so it's weird that we've had a lot of copyright experts say otherwise, because it shouldn't be surprising to anyone again. So that's what we're doing when we train a model, right? And like, as you heard, I'm not a giant AI booster. Mm-hmm. I just think that, like, you're entitled to your own facts, but not your own, or rather, you're entitled to your own interpretation, but not to your own facts. Right. And like, this is just a fact. This is how copyright law works. It's how the jurisprudence goes. So it shouldn't be surprising that performing mathematical analysis, which is training a model, is illegal. And it shouldn't be surprising that publishing the mathematical analysis, which is making the model available, is also legal under copyright law. If you count the number of beats per minute on a song that you buy on a pirate CD and you tell someone else about it, it's not a copyright infringement. Right? Now, can the model produce a copyright infringing work? 100%. And that's a copyright infringement. If you ask the model, make me Mickey Mouse, and it makes Mickey Mouse, and there's no fair use in it because it's not a parody, it's not transformative, it's not, it interferes with the market for the underlying work, it fails all the fair use tests, it fails the common sense that is at the root of fair use, and so on, that can be an act of infringement. And there can be secondary liability. So not only can the user be liable for the infringement, but maybe the people who make the model can be liable for it, especially if they advertise it for that purpose. Or maybe, and it's not clear whether this is the case, but maybe if they fail to install safeguards to prevent that from happening. Again, copyright law is pretty thin here, but it's not an outrageous idea to say that maybe there's a world in which a court is going to look at copyright law as it's written today and say, you should be implementing some kind of safeguard, a guardrail that stops the model from infringing copyright, or takes some reasonable steps to stop the model from infringing copyright. It may be impossible to do that. But here, like, copyright law did not come down off a mountain on 2 stone tablets. It doesn't have to, even if this is what copyright law says now, it's not what it has to say tomorrow. So maybe we get Congress to change copyright law, and they change copyright law and they say training is illegal. And maybe they say it's like the totality of it, right? So it's not scraping, it's not mathematical analysis, not publishing analysis. It's doing all three for the purpose of making an AI. And maybe we have some kind of rationale for it that works maybe a little like kosher law, where like the reason you can't mix milk and meat in Leviticus is that it's considered cruel to cook the calf in the milk of its mother. It's a very weird kind of squick factor that is the basis of this law. And maybe we say, okay, it's legal to like copy works, and it's legal to, make new works when you copy them, when you like learn from them and so on. But, taking everything an artist has made and using it to make a work where you try to put that artist out of business, it's especially galling and gross, and we're going to make it illegal. So let's say we do that, because I think it's galling and gross to do that, right? So would it work, right? Not like would the law be enforceable. Let's say we can enforce it. Would it stop artists from having their livelihoods destroyed? And here is where I think I part ways with a lot of people, because you can give artists the right to decide who trains a model with their work. But all you're doing in an environment of heavily concentrated entertainment companies is giving them something else they'll be required to sign away when they bargain with those companies. Because if that legal right exists, right, if the right to decide who can train a model exists, it will be a non-negotiable component of every contract for the big 5 publishers, the big 4 studios, the big 3 labels, the big 2 ad tech companies, the big 1 ebook and audiobook company. They're just going to make you sign it over, right? Giving your bullied kid extra lunch money doesn't buy them lunch, right? It just gives the bullies more money. And one thing we know about the entertainment companies is they're not opposed to AI, and they're not opposed to using AI to displace artists. They're opposed to their work being used without payment to make AI that is used to displace artists. They want to use it to displace artists, right? They want to retain their position, but deprive artists of their livelihoods. And this has been the case ever since the year dot. With their artists and entertainment companies are class enemies. I don't mean by that like the individual people who work at the studios or the publishers of the labels hate artists. Those people often get in that sector because they love artists. But David Zaslav, who's a guy who runs Warner Discovery, he would happily impoverish every artist in the country and dance a jig on their graves when they starve to death. And this is the guy who killed Coyote versus Acme because he could get a bigger tax credit for it than he could for releasing it.
Right. Yeah.
Right. This guy does not give a goddamn about artists. And, you know, when the Disney suit dropped against, I think it was Anthropic or OpenAI, I forget which one they're suing, Midjourney. No, it's Midjourney they're suing. When the Disney suit dropped, the Recording Industry Association, which for some reason has me on their press list, sent me their press release where their CEO said, it's such a shame it came to this. They could have just bought a license to this work. Right? So that's all they want. Right? They want for Sam Altman to give them $100 million for training data to train a model. And then they want that model to be for their exclusive use or for there to be guardrails to prevent it from making things that compete with the products they sell. And then they want to use that model to fire all of their artists. And so this using copyright to try and save artists from AI, it's a cockamamie scheme, and it's not going to work. And it's going to have a lot of collateral damage because, practically speaking, Congress is not going to pass this kosher law that says that totality is legal. We're going to get either a judge or Congress changing the law so that, like, scraping becomes illegal, and then kiss, search engines goodbye. I hope you like Google because it's the last search engine we're ever going to get because it's the only one that's going to be able to pay everyone's scraping fees, right? And that's just like the end of history for anything that does internet scale analytics. Do you like Shodan? Well, I hope you liked it while it was around because that's the end of it, right? So, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage if we create that law. So, what can we do? What can we do that will actually shift the material conditions of creators rather than merely giving creators another thing to be angry about? And I think here, weirdly, the U.S. Copyright Office, which has been like my arch nemesis for 25 years, is on our side. The U.S. Copyright Office keeps ruling that the works produced by algorithms are in the public domain, right? For the same reason that, like, the monkey selfie is in the public domain. Copyright's a thing for people. It's not a thing for anything except humans. And as much as the entertainment companies hate paying artists, the one thing they hate more is the idea that someone can take their stuff for free and sell it. And if everything the algorithm produces in the public domain, then everything they produce can be taken by anyone else and sold. Right? It's free at the point of creation as a result. And they would happily just pay us if that's all it takes to get a copyright. And if we lean into the Copyright Office's ruling that the only copyrighted in AI art work is the prompt, right? The output of the prompt is not copyrightable. The prompt is copyrightable. And it's very straightforward to reproduce the work without reproducing the prompt. For one thing, you can just copy the work, right? You can copy the outputs. If we lean into that, they're just not going to use AI in place of us. Instead, we'll get AI tools in the background. They're the equivalent of the programmer Centaur, right? Here's a thing where, as a video editor, if you decide that like you want to change the eye line of everyone in a crowd scene, you can just use an AI to do it. And like the eye movement is in the public domain. Who cares? Yeah. Right. And like no one's being put out of business because they never would have gotten all those extras back in the gymnasium and for the basketball game to just have them look in another direction after the fact. And now people making art have a new tool. It's cool. Right. Like that's peace in our time.
Real quick, what's next for you? And I know you got a book coming out, right? Tell us real quick about that.
So Enshittification drops on the 6th of October. Yes, the 6th of October. And while we were discussing it, I got a great blurb from Ed Snowden.
Oh, really? Oh, fantastic.
Popped into my Signal while we were talking. The book that explains the exploitation that changed the internet and our lives. Dr. O gave us the word to describe how these companies immiserate humanity on a planetary scale. Go, Ed.
All right.
So, yeah.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. So it's coming out in October, and then there's a bunch more stuff coming out with it. And I think we'll find out from my editor probably tomorrow, but I think I have sold him on a book about why I'm sick about talking about AI that's going to contain a lot of this stuff. It's called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Talking About AI.
Fantastic. All right, Corey, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
All right.
Good talking to you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Nice talking.
So, yeah, apparently Edward Snowden sent Cory Doctorow his book blurb on Signal while we were recording this interview. At this point, I know several people that either know Edward Snowden, have worked with Edward Snowden, or have even met him, I think, in a couple cases. So I keep getting closer. I hope someday to interview Ed. I like to call him Ed. So, hey, Ed, if you're listening, I would love to have you come on the show. Seriously, though, Edward Snowden's revelations were really what kind of got me into this whole thing. So that would be kind of the holy grail of interviews for me. Anyway, that was a fascinating talk, as always, with Cory Doctorow. He mentioned the book Careless People. I'm currently about a little over halfway through that book right now, and it is really interesting. It's very entertaining. It's not a dry book at all. And along the way, we learned some really disturbing stuff about Meta and Facebook, but some really important things and things that I am now glad are out there to be known. I would actually love to get that author on this show as well. I'll have to look into that. Cory also mentioned the Coyote versus Acme movie. Actually, I believe it was an article. It was written back in the 90s. It's been around for a while. And I looked it up because I was curious. Someone actually just bought the rights from Warner Brothers, and it is scheduled to come out as a movie late next summer. So that should be interesting. But I often see Cory at Hacker Summer Camp. He's usually there for at least DEF CON. I don't know if he's going this year. We'll find out. But I will definitely be meeting some of his other EFF colleagues, in particular, at the very least, Cooper Quentin, who is not only runs the EFF Tech Trivia Contest, which I usually try to participate in. And actually, the first year I was there, I just kind of randomly participated in that group. And that's where I met several people from the Cult of the Dead Cow. By pure accident. Like literally at the time, I don't think I knew who the hell they were. Plus, it was really dark in the room where we did this too, in my defense. And we were all wearing masks. Anyway, we are going to try to get together as a team and play again this year. We played together last year. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, but turns out Cooper Quentin is somebody I'm also going to be interviewing soon. I think I actually interviewed him once before. So it won't be the first time. But he and another hacker associated with Cult of the Dead Cow named The Gibson are working on a project called Ray Hunter. And it is a project that turns a cheap mobile hotspot device into a device that helps to look for and track stingrays or IMSI catchers or fake cell sites. I actually have one. I've got their software running on it. I played with it a little bit, but they've got a workshop they're going to be doing out there. And I thought that would be a fun topic around DEF CON to talk about. So we're going to be doing an interview with those guys. I was going to try to do it while I was in Vegas, but we talked about it and we all kind of agreed. Vegas is just nuts. Me putting together a show next week is going to be difficult as well. I'm going to do what I can. There will be a show in a week. It just remains to be seen exactly what that show will be about or how it's going to go. But I will be taking my portable recording rig. I will gather some audio while I'm there for sure. But my interview with Cooper and Gibson will be probably done remotely after the Hacker Summer Camp is over. But I will certainly talk to those guys while I'm there. And maybe I'll get a little bit of a snippet while I'm there as a teaser. So Corey was really short on time. We didn't actually get to record any bonus content, which is something I usually try to do for my patrons. However, what I did do for my patrons is instead I went back and put together my very first interview with Cory Doctorow, and we're going to do that for the bonus content this week. And back when I did the interviews way back in the day, like this was 8 years ago. This was 2017 when I first interviewed Corey. Back then, I used to do the news and the interviews kind of together, and I would split them up. So I would do a little news, I'd do half the interview, and then in the next show, I'd do some more news and do the other half of the interview. And as you, of course, now know, I do it the other way around. I actually do an interview, and then I do a new show. So anyway, I went back, found that audio, cleaned it up a little bit, and put that into this week's bonus as one entire interview from back in 2017, my first time I ever talked with Cory Doctorow. So patrons, that is what you will be getting this Thursday morning. All right, so looking ahead a little bit, when I come back from Vegas, between the time I get back from Vegas and the end of August, I think I have no less than 4 interviews scheduled to be recorded. So packing in a lot of content. I kind of go feast or famine when I do interviews. I do a bunch and I take a break, and then I do a bunch and take a break. So anyway, I got a whole bunch coming up after I get back from Vegas, and some really great interviews. I just actually I've already interviewed Monique Priestley. She's a representative in the House of Representatives in Vermont, who is really big on privacy legislation and came very close to passing a landmark privacy bill in Vermont last year. And we're going to talk about how that worked, like how that sausage was made. And it's really very fascinating to learn the types of lobbying and the types of shenanigans that go on when trying to pass privacy legislation, even just at the state level in this country. So we talked about that, and you'll be getting that interview soon. But the interviews I'm doing when I come back, I'll be talking with Carissa Valise. Again, very much looking forward to that. We're going to be talking about AI, and in particular the ethics around AI. As I said, I'll be talking with Gibson and Cooper Quinton about their Ray Hunter. I'm also going to be talking with Vishnu Mahandras he's the CEO and founder, I believe, of ENTE. And then I'll be talking with Paul Roberts, who is the president of SRFF, or the Secure Resilient Future Foundation. So lots of great interviews going to be happening in August, which you will get later on this fall. So that's going to do it for this week, everybody. I got to get ready. I got to go. It's time for me to head out to Las Vegas. So till next week, as always, take care, stay safe out there, and don't get caught with your drawbridge down.